Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of the podcast Canada's Musical Mosaic. I'm your host, Rea Beaumont. In this episode, I have the great pleasure of welcoming a very special guest to launch my second season. She is a Grammy and Juno Award-winning Canadian soprano, an opera singer, and a conductor. She's received the Order of Canada and countless honors, including the 2025 Polar Prizze from Sweden, along with fellow laureates Herbie Hancock and Queen. She's received honorary doctorates from Mount Allison University and the University of Toronto, both in Canada. She introduces new audiences to 20th century music, new music, as well as performing traditional classical repertoire. She performs with and also conducts so many of the world's finest orchestras and has collaborated with iconic composers such as Ligeti, Pierre Boulez, and so many more. I am so pleased to introduce Canadian musician Barbar Hannigan. Hello, Barbara, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's so nice to be here, Rea. Thank you so much.
You have had and still have an illustrious career. I'd like to start actually by taking you back to 2017 with your Grammy-winning album, Crazy Girl Crazy. The repertoire, it's a bit different. It included Berg's Lulu Suite, Berrios' Sequenza, and Gershwin's Crazy Girl Suite, and it was performed with the Dutch Ludwig Orchestra. That's quite the stylistic range, especially with the Gershwin, maybe as a sidestep from contemporary classical. So what led you to choose this specific repertoire for the album?
Well, the album centered around the character of Lulu, and that's an operatic role from the opera by Alban Berg, which I'd been singing since 2012, and really was a very life-changing experience for me. I think any soprano that sings that role of Lulu, which is like more than 3 hours on stage, belongs to like a special club. I wanted to make an album kind of around who I feel Lulu is. And that character is a person who came from a very uncertain background and who finds her authentic self and is a very kind of strong kind of architect of her own destiny and driven by authentic feelings of passion and love and courage and very truthful character, actually. So I wanted to make an album around the suite that Alban Berg had made, 33-minute suite for orchestra, mainly with some soprano material in it. And around it, the reason I chose a piece by Luciano Berio, called Sequenza 3, which is for solo voice. It's about a woman who, the text literally says, "Give me a few words for a woman to sing, to build a house before night comes." So it's a kind of deconstructed way of looking at those words, and it's a very dramatic, theatrical scene just for solo voice, in which the character is really searching for security and stability. And then the Gershwin actually made perfect sense to me to pair with the Lulu Suite. And I could probably talk for a long time about that, but just to make it really simple, George Gershwin and Alban Berg knew each other, and they were great admirers of each other. And while Alban Berg was writing his opera Lulu, Gershwin was writing his musical Girl Crazy. And they're both about love. Except Gershwin has his characters in a kind of innocent American Broadway kind of relationship, whereas Alban Berg is developing Franz Wedekinds play, which was very complex and dealing with a lot of like psychological below the surface aspects. But, Alban Berg had a party in Vienna in the early 1930s, and it was a party that he held for George Gershwin, who was on tour.
Wow.
Yeah. And so Gershwin's at his house, and there was some of Alban Berg's music being played, and they asked Gershwin if he would play the piano. And he was embarrassed to share his music because he thought that it wasn't on the same level as the music that these Viennese composers were presenting. And apparently, Alban Berg turned to George Gershwin and said, "Mr. Gershwin, music is music." for me, this was a very powerful statement because this is also what I very strongly believe. I love all kinds of music, and I know that I perform music that some people think is incredibly complex and even intellectual in the classical, contemporary classical music realm. But I really do believe that music is music, and I love all kinds of music, and I perform all kinds of music because I think it is literally the power of sound, making sound, resonating with sound, and sharing that with an audience, which is the most important thing.
You know, that's beautifully said. I heard you say in a French interview that it was the sensuality and the beauty of modern music that drew you to it, that it's not an intellectual exercise. And I thought, you know, that's exquisitely said. So, yeah, thank you very much for that insight. It's not an intellectual exercise, but it is incredibly demanding repertoire that you do, some of the most difficult in all the repertoire. A couple of questions for that. What is the most intricate vocal work that you've ever performed? And maybe tell us a bit about the challenges of working on it or the experience of performing it, and even how you keep your vocal range going. What is your vocal range? What is your routine? Whatever you'd like to share on that.
Well, I think, first of all, I'm a real technician. And I work on my voice very technically like an athlete. And I work on my body like an athlete as well. I run every day. I do lots of stretches. I treat myself like a dancer who sings. The vocal warm-up for me is a sacred thing. And it's something that I never, ever will omit from my day. If I'm going to sing, I have to warm up. Mm-hmm. I'm very particular about how I do it. I do exactly the same thing. The basics of the warm-up are that I start in a kind of low range, middle low range with humming, closed mouth humming, and I work down very gently to the bottom of the range. So that's like about a C below middle C in humming. And then I start working up, again, very gently, closed mouth humming. I always tell myself it's a warm-up, not a workout. I don't have anything to prove. I'm awakening the instrument and awakening the resonance. And so with closed mouth humming, I actually go all the way to the top of my range, which normally is about an E flat above high C, sometimes higher. Sometimes I don't have the E flat. Sometimes I have a D. So, it's about just over 3 octaves. And then I'm 54. And I still have the full range. In fact, I have a bigger range than I did when I was younger because I didn't have the low notes. So I might have had a few more high notes when I was younger. Not really, though. But I didn't have the low register, and now I do. Then I do staccato exercises for onset. Onset meaning the actual meeting of the vocal cords in a very gentle staccato way. So I might do some arpeggios or just, or scales. And then after I finish the staccato, if I have time, I do some scales and I'll do some long tones, and then I'm ready to work. And I'm very, very disciplined about the working, other than the addiction that everybody has to their mobile phone, which it's very hard to put it away. But other than that, once I start working, I make a plan for how I practice. I don't just kind of open the scores and say, hey, what am I going to do today? I'm very specific about what I'm going to practice and how I'm going to practice it. And I don't waste time on things I do well, because that would kind of be useless. So I practice the stuff that I don't do well. I don't learn new music with my voice. So if I have a new piece like I'm working on now called The White Book, which is on the Nobel Prize-winning book by Han Kang, by a British composer, Laura Bowler, and every day, she sends me a few more pages of the music. So even just before I talked to you tonight, I'd gotten 3 more pages, and so I started working on it. So I look at it, I study it, I think about it. How is this going to be? I don't sing it until I know what the notes are. So I don't discover notes with my voice, because that would be like running an obstacle course without walking the course first. It would be dangerous. So I walk the course with my mind and my visualization first, and then I start to sing. And I'm a good sight reader, so usually I can learn, things very fast. And you asked me, what are the most technically demanding things? I would say two pieces, three. I would say three had the most difficulty for me. One was the opera Lulu that I mentioned before, because it's a marathon. It's incredibly difficult for the brain to learn. It's 12-tone music. I'm on stage for more than 3 hours, usually in a very demanding physical production. One production I did, I was in point shoes. And the other production I did, I was doing acrobatics. So both of them were very demanding in a cardio way, and remembering the music and singing the right notes at the right time and the right rhythm with the other singers. And so that marathon was really, really fun for me to do, because that's a stamina situation, mentally, physically, vocally. And then on the other end of the spectrum, probably one of the most difficult pieces I did was Ligoti's Mysteries of the Macabre, which a lot of people know me for because they saw the video on YouTube where I'm dressed like a schoolgirl singing that piece with Simon Rattle, or the version that I conduct myself where I'm wearing this black leather getup. And that was a very difficult piece, even though it's only 7 minutes long. I learned it in 2001. I remember I had to slow myself down. I learned it like a Mozart concert aria. So I was very, very careful to keep the voice very pristine and beautiful and slow. And then as I learned the notes and as I knew that my body knew where the next note was, I sped it up and sped it up and sped it up until I could sing it at the tempo that Ligeti wrote it at. And I think that probably the third most difficult piece for me, challenging piece, was another iconic work that was written for me called Let Me Tell You by Hans Abrahamsson, which was a piece he wrote for me in 2013, which I premiered with Berlin Philharmonic, and then I've sung it all over the world. It's 33 minutes long, and it is absolutely beautiful exploration of the character of Hamlet's Ophelia. And it's very delicate and very exposed. And it has all the things in it that I would have been so afraid of as a young singer. I never could have done it. High pianissimo, long notes, long sustained phrases. That was my nemesis as a young singer. I could do anything fast and difficult, but slow and long was hard for me, and delicate. So it was a real triumph for me to have the mindset to be able to sing that piece and to stay calm. And I did. I hope I'll sing it again. I kind of stopped singing it for a while because I'd sung it everywhere, and I thought I should leave room for some other people to do it. Yeah, it's a very, very important piece for me. So they've all these pieces have had in common that they've challenged some part of me that I felt was weak and I wanted to develop more. Whether it was stamina or whether it was long high notes. I love a good challenge. So that's kind of my answer.
Well, you're definitely like a good challenge, because not only were you one of the world's greatest singers, you'd also decided to take on conducting in 2011. I'd like to know what really led you to yes, because, you could have said no.
It was kind of a long time coming, to be honest. Even when I was at the University of Toronto, the choral conductor at the time, Doreen Rao, she wanted me to take her choral conducting class. And she suggested that I could conduct. Now, this was choral conducting. I did take the class. I kind of audited the class, and because I was so young, I was like 19 or something. But it wasn't the right time. I remember feeling very intimidated to stand in front of my colleagues, from one singer to another, being younger than all of them, and not really feeling that I fit in. So it definitely wasn't the time. I think I went up there once or twice, and that was it. And I thought, never again. But then it was in 2007 when, over the years, I was doing a lot of engagements where we didn't have a conductor. I would, even in modern music, I worked with some ensembles who really did not want to have a conductor. They really wanted, even in large chamber music, to learn the repertoire and do it without conductor. So I had been learning, without even thinking about it, how to show where I was going in the sound, how to lead, give kind of subtle cues that were not conducting. as I was working also as a soloist with orchestras, I kept getting the comment from the conductors I was working with, oh, you're so easy to follow, or you're leading us so well. It's very easy. You always lead me. You show me where you're going to give the downbeat or where you're going to land and so on. And it was getting to the point that I remember one day, Simon Rattle, who I work with a lot, he said to me, you sing like a conductor. I was like, what does that mean? But what he meant was I was ahead in the sound, and it was like one part of me was in the moment and the other part of me was slightly ahead. I knew exactly what he meant because I was doing that. And I'd even been given that advice once from another singer that I'd had one lesson with in my life, a singer named Lillian Watson. I had one lesson with her when I was preparing my first Mahler 4, and she said to me, always be early, always be a little bit ahead, never be late, and conductors will love you. I was like, oh, okay. I translated that into however that fit my body, and I guess it was something that really helped conductors with the way I was working and the way to deal with me. I was getting all these comments, you sing like a conductor, you lead very well, you this. And then I was working with Kurt Masur, the former conductor, of New York and many other places, Gewandhaus and so on. I was working with Kurt Masur, not for the first time, and he wasn't well. I was doing a piece by Dutilleux that I knew very, very well, and I was rehearsing with the orchestra. I was facing the orchestra. I always would sing towards the orchestra in the first rehearsal. I guess I was leading them and him with my eyes, maybe with a shoulder. Without conducting with my hands, I was basically leading them on how we were going to do this piece, moving the tempo a little bit, just with the shoulder or the body, whatever. And I didn't think twice about it. I just thought, this is what we have to do, so that we are the most efficient and do what the composer wants and so on. After that rehearsal, the manager of the orchestra came to me and said, you just conducted that rehearsal. And I said, what? No, I didn't. And he said, yeah, you did. And he suggested try conducting because he said, this is, for me, absolutely clear that you are a conductor and it's in you to do this. He was right. I had to try it. I knew it. I felt it in my gut. And so he said, I think you should sing and conduct Ligeti Mysteries of the Macabre, and I think you should also conduct another piece on the program where you don't sing, so you prove that you've already got chops, So he suggested that it should be Le Renard, The Fox by Stravinsky, which is chamber orchestra, 15 players and 4 male singers. Vocal music would be good for me because I know how to breathe, and it wasn't too big. It was rhythmic and had a structure that would be good for my, confidence level. That was in 2011, and I knew before I walked on stage that everything was going to change. I knew something. I knew that this was not going to be the last time I conducted.
It's been about a year, but I attended your concert in Toronto with French pianist Bertrand Chamayou. Now, we've talked about soul, we've talked about the conducting, but this is really the return to an experience with leader, that intimacy and collaboration. So I'm wondering what you're thinking of this recital experience. It's a huge contrast now.
Yeah, and again, for me, recitals were something that pressed all my fear buttons. I was really afraid of singing recitals. I found it the most nerve-wracking. I found myself feeling very exposed from the time that I was young. I remember at U of T in my bachelor and master's recitals, I never felt confident. It was easier for me to be with an orchestra than it was to sing a recital. So over the years, I had very, very few recital partners, and I gravitated usually to 1 or 2 people. Up until 2019, it was the Dutch pianist and composer and conductor, Reinbert de Leo, who was a huge mentor for me. We worked together for 20 years. And so from 1999, till 2019. doing all kinds of things, but including like 3 or 4 different recital programs. And we recorded one of them, the Vienna program. He was not able to play anymore. In 2019, we did our last concert together in June. And after that, he really couldn't play. So it was maybe a couple of years after that I had already been introduced to Bertrand Chamayou, the pianist. I was living in France, and the head of the record label I work with, he suggested that Bertrand and I should work together. So we decided that we would record an album of the 2 big early song cycles of Messiaen, the Chants de Terre et de Ciel, Songs of Earth and Heaven, and the poem Pour Me, which both were written within I think, 5-year period, 3 or 4 even, by Messiaen in the early to mid 1930s. Bertrand and I decided to record this music together. He is, for me, the natural successor to my relationship with Reinbert de Leo. And I guess what you heard in Toronto was our crazy recital, which is the Chants de Terre et de Ciel of Messiaen. Then Bertrand plays 2 heavy-hitting pieces by Scriabin for solo piano, the poem Nocturne and Vers la Flamme, Towards the Flame. I'm off stage kind of pulling myself together after the Messiaen and changing costume. And then I come back on stage and we do this incredible piece by the American composer John Zorn called Jumalattoret, which is a piece about inspired by Finnish goddesses from the Finnish mythology of the Kalevala. And so this piece is like a real tour de force, but in a way for me, it's in a way it's a little bit easier than the Messiaen because it's so virtuoso. And I can kind of just kind of disappear into it because it's so fun. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's really, really tough. It was really hard to learn. But he's a maverick composer, jazz saxophonist, also plays the organ. He's a multi-talented, creative icon, really, of the 20th century. He's now 72 years old. And I started working with him, I guess I met him about 10 years ago, and we started working together shortly after that. And he's really been a game changer for me because he's written 6 or 7 pieces for me, all of which are fiendishly difficult in their own way, and all of which have changed me as a performer and as a leader. I've translated what I've learned from him, and I bring it with me where I go, and I think he really has inspired a lot of courage in me. So when I won the Polar Prize last year, I mentioned a few composers, and he was the one that I said, the one and only John Zorn, because he's really an extraordinary tour de force.
So for listeners who don't know, Barbar Hannigan's actually from Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast of Canada, trained in Toronto with Mary Morrison at the University of Toronto, Banff and Orford, studying in England and Holland, and now lives in Paris. You've been everywhere, it seems, and being Canadian, has that impacted your career at all, or your outlook, or just your thoughts on being a Canadian artist?
Oh, I think being Canadian is integral to the musician that I am and also to the mindset that I have. I don't think it's for nothing that I have the reputation of being a kind of pioneer. Like, I really like to kind of make a new path. And I remember when I was little, our parents, they had their own house built on a lake. They had to clear the land, and they had to have the plans for the house made and have people build the house. And, the road wasn't even paved where we lived. And I think, for me, that was normal. And I've never been particularly interested in over-cultivated places. I don't care about cities. And I think growing up in Nova Scotia, not growing up in a fancy place, not moving to Toronto until I was 17, and going to hear Toronto Symphony at that time, having a culture that was more community-based than sophisticated, and where we all just worked hard and we did our best to do well at school and get good grades. But at the school I went to, for example, in grade 10, 11, 12, we had math. It was called math. When I got to Toronto to finish high school, because I went to a performing arts high school in Toronto, the Etobicoke School of the Arts, for my last year of high school, they had algebra, relations and functions, and calculus. I was like, what's that? We didn't have Greek or Latin or any of this kind of stuff that was offered in other more sophisticated parts of the country. And I'm happy about that.
You are helping the next generation fill in their gaps with a program called Equilibrium. And I just wondered, maybe just briefly you could tell us, how can potential mentees apply, and just the website where they can look at a little bit more information.
I wanted to create a nonprofit foundation that was going to be mentoring younger professional artists at the beginning of their careers towards developing a mindset that was going to help them not only have a successful but a satisfying career. Like kind of some of the things that I learned when I was at the Banff Centre for the Arts, actually, that we were doing a holistic kind of training. We were doing a lot of research around the music that we were doing, as opposed to just learning the music. We were having movement classes, yoga classes. It was a very, very holistic way, and mental training, mental discipline, which I find is what a lot of athletes work on. And I think high-level performers that want to be at peak or optimal performance, they need to also develop an awareness of those skills so that they can put their attention exactly where they want to put their attention at the moment that they need to do that, not in the practice room exclusively, but under pressure. That's how Equilibrium got born, and we've done all kinds of things. I mean, the Canadian component had some connections to the Toronto Symphony, and for, I think, 4 or 5 years, I was also at this wonderful arts center in Nova Scotia, the Lunenburg Academy of Music Performance, otherwise known as LAMP, and I was doing chamber music projects there. At the end of my summer vacation every year, I would take 1 extra week and work with some fantastic artists, mainly Canadian, like people like Bradley Sherwin and Danica Loren, and like super talented young Canadian artists. And some of them would come more than once, and we would develop special projects and do chamber music there, which was really fulfilling to bring it back to Nova Scotia, So it was really rewarding. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. I just want to thank you for sharing your career insights and finding some time in that incredibly busy schedule of yours. It's been an amazing pleasure speaking with you, and you've been a wonderful guest. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for asking me. I'm just very happy to have the chance to talk to you, and I really appreciate that you reached out.
Well, Barbara, I'd like to wish you the very best on your upcoming projects. Listeners can learn more about Barbar Hannigan's upcoming concerts, albums, and projects on her website, barbarhannigan.com. I'm Rea Beaumont with Canada's Musical Mosaic. You can find this podcast on streaming platforms and also on my website, reabeaumont.com. That's reabeaumont.com. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Until next time. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the host. The podcast is intended for entertainment purposes. Thank you.